I mean, in terms of the tools, just to sort of right to that and go back to your other question, is that I think actually it also comes down to embracing untidiness. It's the wrong word for it, but we do have a tendency to go early for pretty, and it doesn't actually often help us, because what we do unintentionally is we oversimplify the thing we're trying to understand. And I see this often a lot with assisting people, you know, where they sort of show you where they've got to in their sort of thought process with note taking and things. And you say, oh, right, I can see the point where you stopped thinking about the problem and you started thinking about making it all join up. And so what we want to do is we want things that just nudge us back onto the understanding track and not onto the beautification track, unless and until that is the point where that process and skill needs to be applied.
I think that really, Matt, depends on what kind of problems you're doing. If it's a graphic problem in itself, of course, is a bit different.
Well, then it's self-evident. There's a different element, but most things are not that graphical. I mean, we often make them that way because we respond to it well. And I think we like, you know, when things are visualized, because we're probably very visual centric. In that sense, we sometimes don't help ourselves because we actually give ourselves more visual load that is not actually pertinent to the thing we're trying to understand.
But talking of visual load, Matthias, what is this? This is very interesting.
It's just for fun, talking about whales a couple of minutes ago. But I like to share another story to support Mark's case.
No, hang on, you're saying just for fun, but can you tell us what it is? It's actually quite nice.
It's a whale. On social media, on Twitter, there's a thing called Melville Monday. So people on Mondays share pictures of whales, and I was reminded a couple of minutes ago, of course, on the Whalestot. So I looked up what I shared on these occasion of the Melville Monday, and this is what I came up some time ago. So I shared it here. And if you see some little, probably religious people moving into the whale. So the story of Jonas probably depicted here. Yeah, we can dive deeper into the whales right now, but I wanted to share maybe one or two stories to support Mark's recent sentiments. I once had a student. She was very, very good in drawing, actually, and the task that I gave to all the students was come up with sketches of ideas of new prototypes. And she was always too pretty in what she was painting. And then I told her, not waste so much time. You're skilled, you're talented, it's wonderful. But for this very task, use the other hand, use the weak hand to draw something really rough. I don't want prettiness. I want fast and quick ideas, because then it's much easier to throw them away and iterate on this simple and stupid ideas. Another story or typical aspects for interface design is the way how we user interface designers present our ideas to customers. And the question is, do we do line drawing, so rough wireframes, or does it look already Photoshop-like wonderful with colors and shades and so on? And how do our customers respond to the rough sketches versus the almost final looking Photoshop designs? And the idea is the more rough, the more fast, the more rapid it looks, the more discussion is introduced over these rough sketches, because obviously it's just a sketch. So it's easy to build on top of the sketch. Rather, on the other side, if you have a photo finished design, which might be the same effort if you're really skilled, then the customers are kind of intimidated and say, well, no, it's wonderful, I take it, no critique, just do it that way. So the level of readiness is really a different one, and therefore the level of discussion on the subject, the ideas that being emerged, is really different, whether the whiteboard is really a rough one or whether the prototype is really a finished one. This is what I wanted to add to Mark's considerations.
So this is something that I was also taught when I was doing my master's in HCI. It's, you know, the more refined it is, the less likely it is someone will comment it down. But I think we've gotten to a point where the sophistication of the user has changed over the last few decades, where if you show them a piece of software, that, oh my God, I hope that's virtual reality and not real, Adam. No, you look good. I mean, remember, Apple does pixel perfect prototypes. I think you can lie to yourself. We're talking about different things. We're talking about building an interface to something. That's one thing, but also sketching out the answer. So it probably comes back to use case. Anyway, sorry, Fabian, you had your hand up before me.
No, just briefly, one of the tricks, let's say, I tend to do is to put, for example, fonts or just how do you say, CSS theme or a skin that look like this, like handcrafted, or that's like just it must be rough in order to remind people participating the discussion that we're not judging. Basically reminded them what we're talking about and where we're prompting for feedback, and it's precisely so that we don't converge too fast to something too pretty that doesn't actually address the problem. It's a bit of a trick, let's say, to use this kind of themes, but I find it works relatively well, so that it's not something. I think it's really one of the trickiest problem. It's much beyond software. It's in general of wanting to finish quickly, which is fair. We don't want to spend an infinite amount of resources, but doing it poorly because we just remain superficial and avoid tackling what is the actual deeper problem, and using some visuals. Especially, I think it's less the case when, for example, here it's just words in the air, so they remain malleable, let's say. But as soon as it takes a shape, when it's jolted down a medium, inscribed, then it's become way trickier, and thus having those like perpetual virtual reminders or visual reminders that it is a work in progress. So you must give your feedback on what it will do, not even how it does. I think it's pretty.
There is a related issue, and now we got to be very honest. Who here played Dungeons and Dragons?
A little while ago, I haven't for a bit.
Okay,
only because it never crossed my doorstep at that time. Not out of any antipathy, just to clarify.
Okay, so one thing that I found with Dungeons and Dragons, I'm a very visual guy. I love painting the little LED figurines and all of that stuff. But I think this plays entirely into what you're saying, Mark. When I had really beautifully painted figurines of the dragon and the guys doing this, that, and the other, that became the instantiation of that. So if suddenly we had a druid instead of an archer, whatever it might be, if we didn't have exactly the right thing, then the visualization would get in the way. But when we had to play with abstract things, like we used dice to represent different people and monsters because we didn't have the figures, then it was easier to internalize it. Which of course also goes to the argument of should there be real whales or blocks in Andreas' visualization earlier. So I don't think you should use the term pretty. But of course, and I'm saying this to discuss it with you because it's
sure. I mean, and I know all the words are culturally loaded, and I pluck one from the air. So you're absolutely right. I mean, because I don't know what the term is that describes the sort of sense of visual beauty without, in a sense, having other meanings to it.
Well, let's look at it this way. In Pages and Word, you can do colors and fonts and all of that stuff. In Author, you cannot, as of course you know. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is I don't want you to futz around with fonts. So if you want to call that pretty, maybe, but maybe there's an even better word. Is it presentation layer? Is that maybe what we're talking about? Because that also reflects on what Matthias was saying, I think. There is a difference between considering, even though text can never exist without a typeface, then it's not text, right? There is no neutral. Just like 3D always has to be rendered, even if it's green wireframe. What are the means through which we can build the right kind of representation where the visual doesn't overload or over bias too much, or become something you play with it for itself? I think you raised a really important, interesting question, Mark. I'm just wondering how it fits.
Well, one other interesting thing is, I know you make a good point. So, for instance, I certainly find the effectively what I see in author and reader as, in that sense, really pleasing. Though oddly, even though I know why, my mind cannot get round headings that are to the right of the paragraph that follows them. I know it's because it's supposed to indicate the level of heading. But even if I know, and this plays back to the same thing, and it shows that there are two different things at work here. So I'm looking at it as something that I find aesthetically pleasing. It's not jarring. It's easy to look at. But just some of those little choices actually can be derailing. And when I talk about not making things over pretty, it's sort of doing things that you catch on like that, because in an earlier stage of the process, and I'm not now talking about sort of author or reader specifically, but you know, if you're trying to understand the sort of the shape of a problem, putting in structure that you don't need to, because it makes you feel like you've made progress, I think, to pick up, as sort of Fabian picked up on, which I agree, is, I've learned over time, actually a retrograde step. And the more you resist it, because then when you genuinely come across something that needs to be surfaced and structured, it really sticks out, and you say, okay, I now know, you know, this is a known thing. I now have genuine confidence to put that in place. But our tendency is to want to do that much earlier than is necessary, and it makes me understand why a lot of people don't get what prototyping is, because to their eyes it looks ugly. It looks ugly and unfinished. Therefore, it's not, you know, where is its worth and value? Well, if that's the only way you judge it, yes, you might say that. But of course, as well we know from all the really interesting things that, you know, people are doing here, that's not what you're trying to achieve. It's the exploration, and in that sense, avoiding making it look all finished is a really powerful tool.
When it comes to the indentation, what is the consensus in the room? And I'm wondering, maybe, Mark, because you've been reading a lot of academic papers, is it the fact that it's 1 and then 1.1?
No. It's in the text. When you have the text and the heading is indented to the right of the left margin of the text. It just, I don't know what it does. It just does something bad in my brain.
You mean,
showing some stuff earlier.
That doesn't happen anymore, because for the academic.
Oh, okay.
Because they're aligned on both sides.
Sure. I mean, I understand why. The silly thing is that's why I commented on it, despite the fact that part of my brain knew exactly why it was happening, because in fact it was showing the headline progression, because it didn't necessarily have a number on. So the further right the heading was, the lower in the heading order. So it was giving me actually meaningful thing. But the other part of me, which was sort of said, I know how print's supposed to look, is saying, this is wrong. That, you know, why is this in the wrong place? And all that's going on when all I'm trying to do is actually read the text on the screen. So in that sense, it was disruptive.
Yeah, this is, even though we're dealing with the most boring thing in the whole community here of just flat text and an outline. Let me show you this. So we have the issue.
Sure.
We have the issue with so indents in the overview. You don't mind?
No, because that's clear left to right structure. We and generally, or culturally in the West, we go sort of top left to bottom right. So there's nothing untoward in that.
But so what I've done today is, when you do find this, all the headings are now reduced to the same size as the main text, and that was actually a huge revelation, because when they were big, maybe I have a screenshot to show you. It was like this. They were way too strong. That's not what you're searching for. So what you're talking about, you know, whether things indent or big or small or whatever, it does actually matter. That was my mother. She's called me several times. I'm gonna have to call her back. I'll be right back, guys.
I will actually still remain there, but on mute, to go try to prepare for the next presentation.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
So I think in about an hour. So,
yeah, let's do that actually. Then we all can do some kind of prototyping or sketching or whatever we might do for that. Okay, gotta go. Okay, see you in an hour then.
Matthias, before you go, if you're still there,
Yes,
I wondered if you. I listened. I can't remember I can't remember what caused me to do so, but I listened to, there was a wonderful Ted Nelson thing. It's a recording that's, because he's put some stuff into his archive in the last couple of years, and it's a talk he gave. It's only a recording, and I'm wondering if there were any, he must have made some slides that I'm guessing would have been his drawings. But it's this lovely thing. So it's about 1966, and he's basically just, you know, gently all the way through saying, well, why can't we do this? And you hear the audience responding to he's obviously flipping through some pictures. Of course, it would help if I'll have to go away and look actually to find the name of the thing. But it was
That's really tough. So a video recording from 1966, Ted Nelson?
well, no, but I wondered if it's sort of it's getting through. Ted, you occasionally ask him questions. I'm too busy. You know, I'm an old man. I don't have time to do this. To say, yeah, but probably in a sense, at least which box should we go? You know, digital box might we go look in? Because I know a lot of stuff's been scanned. Interestingly enough, you may recall I did these ebooks of literary machines and also Home Computer Revolution. If you don't have that one, I'll send it to you. I did the other one later. It's I don't know if you know this book.
It's not on my shelf, but I know it. Yes.
Okay, I'll make a mental note. I'll send you. I made an ebook of that one as well. You can tell it's a TED book because there's one page that just clearly the paragraph didn't make it to the next page, you know, because when you're proofreading it, you're thinking, I must have made a mistake, but no, it's there in the original. But it's interesting that he actually has no interest at all in sort of producing an ebook, which is a shame in a way. I get you know, his sense is, well, there are now some copies. In fact, there are only very early copies of literary machines in his archive, but I'm not sure he really understands. Will people go there and wade through a sort of, you know, scanned PDF? And one of the things I've been doing is I've been talking to, I don't know if you know her name, by Dini Grigar, she's got a lab up in Washington State University. She's more from the sort of literary hypertext side, but she's got a lab full of old kit. So you can go and read a, you know, HyperCard thing on the Apple that it would have run on at the time. It's pretty cool, actually. And she's been doing some stuff sort of, basically they're reconstructing early sort of hypertext experimental literature and games and stuff using modern materials, so you can sort of see it, but you can look at artifacts of the original. And I thought one of the things I discussed with her maybe would be to do sort of, as a place to put literary machines as an interesting work, because it evolved over some years, would be to get at least, I think there are only really about 4 different editions. I mean, he did lots of reprints, but I think he only did about 4 real editions. And so, you know, it's this thing of having the text, because it's nice to look at. It's great if you have the paper. It's nice to look at in a sense the print as it was. But what's really interesting is to be able to do the digital annotation of it for whatever it is you're doing. Because I still think it's one of those works, well, indeed some of his other stuff, that still speaks quite strongly to this whole area, and thinking about just non-linear interpretation of things. I mean, does that seem sensible? Because it's that stupid thing. I did all this work, gosh, 5 years ago, and it sort of sat on my drive. And apart from sharing the books with a few people, because I thought, you know, they'd probably end up somewhere and Ted might make a few dollars off it, you know, because it's his copyright after all. But I don't think he's particularly interested. I don't think there's any point doing that. I don't think anyone wants to publish it, and I don't want to be a publisher. So I'm thinking that the one place maybe to put it, and where he won't probably, you know, and won't offend his sensibilities, might be to put it in a sense in a literary.
What I really like in Ted Nelson's early writings is the way how he mixes his own reasoning with really rough sketches. So introducing hypertext thought at just a few lines and arrows and saying, well, this is included in this one. And this is so abstract that for the both of us and several and plenty of others, the idea is clear, even though the implementation and the precise design is not clear yet. It doesn't have to be, because the idea is an ideal idea. And therefore, this is wonderful how Ted has structures and has presented his ideas in these works. And well, what do I want to say?
Well, this chimes to what you were just saying about, you know, do a rough sketch. Don't over prettify.
Yeah. It's really wonderful to see the original crisp ideas in its plain form, and that's my angle into the past, to really go to the original ideas and, well, sign a little bit about what has happened thereafter, because it was so cool already, although the hardware software couldn't keep up with the real implementation of what's there. But doing some cross references, I mean, we are struggling with this right now in the future of text. We have a corpus of lots of text, but it's kind of fixed. PDF is kind of dead, so in a sense that you can't really edit it. That's true. If we have Freud as the master of text disaster, then we always have to contribute something to him and take and say thank you what's there, but it's not really a collaborative effort to go there, attribute something, have versioning of what has happened, and draw arrows from one paragraph to the other. So there's lots of stuff that was there already at Doug Engelbart, at Ted Nelson, at some early ideal systems, but that's not there yet. And if we go into 3D, it doesn't get better right now.
Yeah. Well,
so
but also the PKM space is doing exactly the same. They're, you know, basically they're rediscovering what we probably would call hypertext.
That's the alarm. That's not for me. So just a little comments on the whales that we had some seconds before, or a moment before. Well, it puzzled me to a sense that we had a very realistic background, so the green hills and trees. So okay, given it's there, it has nothing to do with the original whale story. So I expected something like water as a starting point, and not some green leaves and trees. Okay, I can live with the idea that I don't have real whales in the beginning, but some cubes. Okay, they seem to be gray already and flocking around. And so I always, during the presentation, I try to remind myself what's going on here. So we have the paragraph of Moby Dick as the original idea in the background, and try to recreate the spirit of Queequeg shooting at the whale in a 3D virtual environment. And that was really, really far apart. So having, I just grabbed into my shelf and have this stone over here. It's just a stone, but we're talking about whales, and then this is immediately clear that this thing could mean a whale. And if I grab the next stone, we have two whales and a family of whales. And it's really an abstract thing. You know, and I know, this is, during our conversation, a whale. It's not a stone. We have fantasy. We can say this is an abstract whale. Fine, full stop. But to have this level of natural understanding, grabbing points in virtual space and real space, having an understanding between the two of us, because we are communicating with each other, that this thing is a whale and it swims in water, is natural. It's human. And we have to do a lot of stuff until the virtual world, my opinion, becomes as natural as grabbing to a stone and say, this is a whale that floats around the ship or whatever. And I have a little video prepared. No, that's not that one. It's from, just a second, and for the two of us, and we are in a wonderful break right now.
Well, we're being recorded, I know, so not that I'm.
Oh yes, everybody can watch. It's Brett Victor on his talk, Stop Drawing Dead Fish. It's another association that I had on the subject of whales. So this is really the 20 seconds I'd like to show to you. You don't need the audio talking right now, but if you watch the video, we are going into an empty space. And the artist or the editor or someone who wants to convey an idea starts to draw a shape. And first the body, and then a tail, and the entire message is don't draw dead fish. So the next couple of minutes, he continues that this abstract shape becomes a fish. It's just two shapes and some mouth and some fins and so on. And it is as simple as this stone being a whale. You draw something and we talk and we say, this shape should be a fish. And a couple of minutes onwards, it behaves like fish, and you can do some stuff and explanation and so on. This is really wonderful because it uses the human fantasy and ability to use abstract concepts and apply it to everyday objects and say, we are talking about the future. Here's the future, there's the past, and we move with our current time into the future, and doing some gestures in the air, using stones and using simple shapes on a screen is something that helps us to convey meaning, even if we don't have words for what's being meant there. And then we talk together on this one, and you understand a couple of stuff, what I said, something you don't understand, but you get another idea, and then the two of us have new ideas, and that's marvelous and wonderful.
Yeah.
And the beauty of a dynamic medium. And if we have stones, once again, if we have stones on the same table and move them around, we have a commute understanding what's going on. If we have a dynamic space where the two of us can interact with these black fish on your screen right now, it's marvelous as well. If we have a virtual environment and cubes and just one person has them, or maybe two have them and the others not, then this communication thing, the external medium breaks apart, because it's not a shared democratic medium, because not everybody has the same access rights to what's going on.
Well, you also made an interesting point there, actually, made in terms of when you mentioned at the end about having, you know, some blocks or something, which is that also that there's a beauty in the choice of the stone.
Yeah.
Because now, if you'd had I don't know, model fish next to it, you might have thought, I mean, you had a choice. So part of the decision is, well, I look around, what are the available proxy objects that I have?
Exactly, yeah.
And that was slightly in my mind when I was responding to Fabienne's point about being able to produce things quickly. It's like, you know, give me a sort of fish-like object, because once we've done that, we sort of say to ourselves, you know, this in the context of this is now a fish, and we don't really worry about whether it's a nice fish or even a real fish.
Yeah.
And that's something I was alluding to, actually, I think it was before you joined this morning, that came to me because I'm working on a research project that's basically just trying to, it's not doing what I thought it was going to be doing. It looks like being just another information portal, but it was the disconnect between the world of sort of metadata and controlled vocabularies and sort of on, you know, these constructed sort of metadata schema and the sort of LinkedIn data ontologies. Because to a certain extent, once I've said this is a fish, the ontological view says, right, I don't care, that's a fish. Stick it in the fish module and I can compute. And that's what I think in a way our brain does. I'm not suggesting it's as it works, but the point is we're quite happy as long as I know this is a fish, I don't treat it as a giraffe.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that I think we need to be taught. So some people, you know, some people know because they just sit amongst it all the time, others because they've sort of learned their way into it. But for most people, I don't think that's natural, in the way that I think most people shy away from looking at things that are prototypes because they're not regularly exposed to basically unfinished things. So we're almost taught that no, wait till it's finished. Don't eat the cake, it's not baked yet. Which gives us an unfortunate sort of negative perception of how to interact with, you know, half-formed ideas, where there is deliberately still scope for fluidity and the option to say, oh, it's that kind of thing where you're sitting there with a sort of problem and someone leans over your shoulder, turns the things the other way up and just walks off. You think, oh, yes. I mean, it might happen. It often happens more in a verbal context, but I use the sort of physical analogy because it sort of it speaks more strongly, but that's much easier to do with something that's part formed, you know, because if I take a cup and stand it upside down, you're immediately going to say that is not a cup because all the liquid will fall out. So it's crossed that threshold where it has any plasticity left in it, despite the fact that the design itself may be subpar in any number of ways, and I'm not a designer or product designer, I might add. But I you know, so a lot of my times mainly spent tinkering with sort of thinking tools, and it's problematic. I think VR suffers in the same way that what they, the sort of data visualization does at the moment. It's at the moment the tools are so immature, and that's not a critique, but I mean that's just the state of their maturity, that you actually need to be quite a mechanic to use them, in the way that, early days, if you bought a car, you had to maintain it. I mean, or you had to own a mechanic because it broke down every day, and probably while you were using it as well. And that's sort of where we are with these tools. So, we're at the stage where we can imagine all sorts of things we can do in these environments. And again, I find, having spent years sort of basically working on, mainly as a sort of information plumber, working on other people's data, where I didn't get, the one thing I couldn't do was change the data, because I didn't make it, it wasn't mine. I just had to get it somewhere else without breaking anything or leaving anything behind. That gives a fascinating insight, because the number of times I sat in a room and sort of said, have any of you actually looked at the data underneath this? Because you're all assuming it's complete, or it's this, or it's that. You don't know that. You absolutely don't know that. And it's those ambiguities that are causing the problem. So in other words, when you see an emergent issue, you're treating completely the wrong thing, because that's not what's wrong. It's the thing back here somewhere else. Created it. And so one of the things that the thing I see really interesting in this area, in doing things like VR and things, is almost the ability to be able to have things have effectively both have proxies, but proxies where you can actually get to the point of, that's, I'm not sure this whale actually is a whale. Let's open up the whale and have a look. And I'm not interested, again, in the abstract. I'm not interested in the data that defines what this object is as a 3D object in space. What was the reason we called this thing a whale?
Yeah,
which would sort of take you out informationally, and in that sense, these spaces, whether they're virtual or even two-dimensionally projected on a screen for us, are potentially beautifully plastic. The difficulty at the moment is almost getting all the bits there, because I always think of it like a jigsaw. Often the puzzle, when I start a new project, you just tip all the data out, tip it on the table, and you start, there's an edge bit there, and the blue bits are, I don't know if I know the blue bits are not red bits. It turns out there may be several different blues, but as you go, and our human mind copes with that instantly. We don't skip a beat, or say, oh, wait a minute, some of these pieces have a really interesting shape. And they're different colors, but so you're busy drawing out. You're effectively you're laying a gentle classification across it as you go.
There's a wonderful German word. I'm not sure whether there's a one-to-one translation into English. It's begreifen. Little German at all. Begreifen. It's to touch something, but it means you understand something.
Yeah, okay.
So that's really the grasp, the manipulation, the pulling out of your jigsaw puzzles on the table to shuffle them around. This is begreifen. So
yes,
to touch it, to move it, to manipulate it, to see what's inside, to really do something with your hands. And this is a metaphorical word, of course, for what's going on over here. And you've mentioned source code a couple of seconds before.
Yeah.
If I go into foreign source code, I go into the editor and shuffle all the brackets around a little bit to understand. So it's really the same as begreifen. I use the keyboard and the source code and move a little bit and do my indentation.
Yeah.
To really see the structure, what's going on there. And I don't use any pretty auto formatter for source code. I have my own style. I know it's difficult to collaborate with other people if I have different bracket styles than others, but you know what I'm talking about. And if
no, absolutely, and the lack of that can completely destroy your understanding. So I remember someone sort of actually watching me effectively. I was trying to, I'd literally done that. I'd taken something, and I was putting it in. I was using some sort of very verbose structure, but because I didn't. It was a sort of level of object orientation I didn't really understand. So I needed to sort of see all the bits. And you might say, well, it's a waste of time. I wasn't so sure because I had an understanding at the end that I didn't have in the beginning. And the interesting thing is that it wasn't something I was ever going to use. I was doing it because I needed to understand the process so that I could interact with someone who was using the process.
Yeah.
And this is another thing we don't do teach or particularly value, but it goes back to me, the strongest example of it was in my early career at sea. So I used to, I stood on the bridge driving the ship. I had an absolute faith that the guys in the engine room wouldn't blow it up or, stop putting fuel in or something. And they had the same utter faith that I wouldn't drive the ship up the beach and drown them all. I don't know what that, I did not have their skills. They did not have mine. And in any social model you normally see, this will be treated as a complete disaster. It actually works because it's the trust at the interface, and part of which is a learned interest in going just more than halfway.
Yeah. So
I can ask you about your subject that I don't understand using some bridging terminology that's immediately sort of clear to you, even if it's not terminology that I would use for myself or to find someone who has the same understanding I do. And the reply went with most people is, well, why bother? And I think, well, you missed the point, because in a sense, if you ask someone a question or you give them a request that they can both understand and action without having to go away and think about it, it becomes a lot easier to work. And it's something that every time I mention an academic sort of environment, you get one of two to respond. Well, either say it'll never happen, just as a matter of principle. B is, what's the point? Or C, I can't be bothered, which is the somebody else thing. Why can't somebody else do all that work? Or can't somebody else invent a thing that does, the universal translator? And they probably could, but then, nothing we create is unopinionated. So therefore, how unopinionated is the universal translator? At least if you're dealing with, somebody else that you are going to meet, say, more than once, and you develop to the point where you can have an interchange with someone who has a completely different skill set. That's really cool, because it allows you to sort of say, look, sort of what I need to do is this, and it allows someone else to say, yeah, you won't be able to do it in a month of Sundays, but I can make one for you here. And it sort of happens online, or it happened far more in the 90s, was my feeling.
What's missing is a kind of confidence level if you interact with someone you don't know, whether it's human or artificial intelligence, I don't care. So what I like in the Alexander pattern language is the little asterisks saying how mature is this pattern, how confident are we that this is really a well-established good pattern, or whether this is just a rough idea in the beginning. And if I do wireframes, I also use different typefaces to annotate these. So if I'm more in the Comic Sans style, it's more like rough, and this is early ideas. And if I go sans serif, it's more final or grotesque. These subtle codes intentionally, I don't know who understands this, but I think it's really the way whether you have well, you look like a doctor or you behave like a clochard once you do philosophy or medicine. But
the hinting is important, actually, because the hinting partly breaks through the vocabulary boundary, because I might look at a sort of design that you have drawn, for sake of argument. I might, but even just effectively an encoding that I don't have to have a deep and complex understanding of can immediately say, okay, so this is broadly sort of conceptual, loose. This is this is more structured and stable. Immediately gives me something, because I was thinking about this when I was listening to all the magic thinking in this research group I've just joined, and everyone's saying, well, we should do this. And I'm thinking that, you're away with the fairies if you think that's going to happen with the time, money, and expertise in the room. But why don't we do something tractable? And I was thinking, one of the things, so for about 20 years, I've written effectively an external manual for this Tinderbox, Mark Bernstein's Tinderbox tool, which I use, which is basically it's a sort of toolbox for thoughts and it has multiple views baked in, which I didn't realize until recently is really quite novel. You know, it's the same data underneath, just viewed a different way. That when you say it to people, it just blows their minds. Well, you've just been using it for the last 5 years and you hadn't noticed. But it allows you to do some of this sort of fluidity of things. But one of the things I noticed was, you know, you put something out online and people would write and say, well, this is all very interesting, but I can't find anything useful in it. And you're thinking, that's odd. I think we've covered virtually everything there. And what it normally comes down to, fun enough, is this boundary vocabulary problem. And when you say, what you call a pair, I call an app. Mm-hmm. And say, right, okay, fine. And it occurred to me, people would, you know, and going back to this sort of research group, say, well, okay, you know, you want better search and stuff, but, you know, have you given any thought to having a learning interface that actually understands that I mean, the data that's in there is broadly correct, the stuff you think you're managing. So if people can't find something, it's probably not because they're stupid. It's maybe because they asked the right question in a way you didn't understand. So what we need to do is we need to sort of learn from this. So going to your point of sort of confidence, it's the sort of melding vocabulary. Yeah. Having a way to say, okay, so it's something that is not necessarily part of the background model, but it's the interface model saying, look, if you get one of these, you need to understand it's possibly, you know, something else. And where you keep that.
During writing my thesis, I had my thesis already online, or the references for my writing already online. And of course, I did my research with Google, as well as going to the library. And it was kind of stunning when Google showed me I want to learn more on this subject, history of hypertext, my own website. What does it mean? Does it mean I've reached everything already and I'm top on the search results, or does it mean, and the second thing I suppose is the true one, I use my own vocabulary, therefore I'm the best fit for what I'm asking, and I don't get the new one that I was really looking for. So I got results, everybody would have been pleased, but I wanted to have everything else but what I already knew.
Yeah, no, I'd agree, because I'm very joyous that some people always say, you know, I just put stuff online and I get an answer. And it means that you either not consider whether the answer is correct, or you're just very, very lucky, because I always seem to be looking for things that I know are there that I just can't damn well find. And they often do turn up, but you have to sort of, you have to sort of go about it. I mean, partly in the way that one of the things I've discovered is that much of the supposedly rich citational view we have, you know, in the Google sort of thing, is actually broken, because all the errors flow from the source. So it only needs the publisher to put the wrong information in, and all these other resources. I came across it when I did a paper, the analysis of hypertext that I did for the Hypertext Conference a year or two ago. And it's really interesting. One of the sort of sharpest peer review things come back was sort of a silent rolling of eyes. Why didn't you use X or Y or something? And I was able to sort of, you know, put a polite thing back, but also showing that actually when you looked at X and Y, they actually had the wrong data. And they had the wrong data because the source was wrong. Yeah. Well, the digital copy was wrong, but the paper, you know, it's this sort of thing, and there's no error in it, but it's this it's this false thing. And I suppose I kept myself lucky in that of in a sense having had an apprenticeship in my sort of early career where personal best was not considered an acceptable outcome. You know, if you couldn't argue, you know, why you've done something stupid and wrong, then you might be in trouble. You know, despite the fact it was very, very forgiving of that, in the sense that, you know, the expectation is that you absolutely would start out by getting everything wrong and make really stupid decisions. But yeah, on the hand, you needed to do that to realize, well, I won't do that again. Whereas we're presented with an answer, and AI is going to make it worse. Not that I'm against it, but I just know from the current problems that the people who'll be hit the worst are those who are the least inquisitive.
Yeah.
Because if they didn't ask a question before, they sure as heck won't now, which is sad, actually.